What is going on, guys? Welcome back to the channel, and today, as you can tell by the title, we are back with another updated hero guide, this time focusing on my personal favourite character in Star Wars, Darth Vader. A few months back I did do a poll to see if you guys wanted to see all of the hero guides get updated, which as you can see by the result was a pretty resounding yes. Vader has changed a hell of a lot since my old hero guides went up, and he's probably one of the most highly requested characters since I did that poll, and so I thought I'd get this out there as soon as I could. Now, you can see on screen what we're going to be going through in this video. We will of course start off with his base stats, then go through and break down all of his abilities, and then I will touch on some tips for both Galactic Assault and the hero game modes, covering both these star cards as well as just some general gameplay tips as well. Now, keep in mind that almost everything in this guide was tested in arcade, and while I'm 99% sure that all of these stats do transfer over to multiplayer, just bear in mind that there is always a chance that some stats may actually change from arcade to multiplayer, so if you see any stats that don't seem right, then that's most likely what's happened. So, getting stuck into it, first off we're going to take a look at his base HP, and he does have the equal highest of every character in the game, coming in at 800 HP, and with certain cards and abilities you can actually get that above 1000 HP for short periods of time, but I will touch on that a little bit later on. On top of that, he does also have 250 health regen as well, which is pretty much the average for the saber users, so you can go from 800 HP all the way down to 550 HP and still be able to regen all the way back to full health. Now, his weapon of choice is of course his iconic Crimson Lightsaber, and being such a strong character, he does deal a good amount of damage with it. It deals 130 damage per hit from the front and 160 damage per hit from behind, which is pretty much just above the average for the saber users, so it is fairly high, yet at the same time it's not drastically better than anyone else either. He has a pretty decent swing speed, coming in at 1.7 swings per second. That's probably more towards the middle ground, however since he has such a high damage output, 1.7 is actually pretty decent. His lunge distance is what I'd probably class as medium. It's nowhere near as far as Rey or Darth Maul, but it is also a lot further than someone like Grievous, so overall it is probably right there in the middle. As for his stamina pool, I was very tempted to class this as low because he can actually only swing 8 times before he does run out of stamina, but he does also have somewhat decent blocking stamina, and so therefore I have classed it as medium, but just keep that in mind that his actual attacking stamina is the worst in the game to counter the high damage output. Now, moving on to his abilities, and he does have arguably the best set of abilities of anyone in the game. All of them serve a really useful purpose, and to be honest I wouldn't even say any of them are even close to being bad. His L1 ability is his Saber Throw, which has a 7.5 second cooldown, and this one is probably one of the most satisfying abilities in the game. As the name suggests, Vader throws his saber in front of him, dealing 150 damage to anyone that it hits along the way, and then it can actually deal another 150 damage on the way back if the enemy is still in its way. Saber Throw is extremely useful due to its ability to add some very helpful range to Darth Vader. Obviously, saber characters have to play in close quarters pretty much at all times, and so this does just add that extra layer to Vader, meaning that no enemy is really safe, even if they are 10 or more meters away. As for its weaknesses though, it does mean that you actually can't block or attack while the saber is gone, obviously, and so when you do use it, I find that you're best to try and dodge around or just try and stay on the move, since you can't really do anything else. Moving on to his L1R1 ability, this one is called Focused Rage, and it has a 15 second cooldown, which for what it does is actually really decent. When the ability is activated, it gives Vader increased stamina, bonus health, and on top of that a small damage increase as well. Rather than the 130 to 160 damage output, he'll now deal 145 to 175 damage per hit. He'll also gain 200 HP for a short period of time, and that increased stamina that I mentioned allows him to swing 16 times rather than 8 before he runs out. This ability helps Vader become even more of a tank than he already was, and especially in a 1v1 or just any battle against enemy heroes, it really can completely turn the tide in your direction. Its only real downside is that it does have a small animation when you activate it, and there were ways to avoid the animation. However, Yoda just got that changed about his animation, so it could be the same for Vader too, but I'm actually not 100% sure. Moving on now to the R1 ability, this one is his choke ability, and it has a 25 second cooldown since it is very deadly. As the name suggests, Vader uses the force to choke his enemies, dealing roughly 125 damage while they're being choked, and then dropping them pretty much at his feet where he can deal with them fairly easily, all the while having 80% damage reduction while it's active. Choke is amazing at slowing down the tempo when you're under a little bit of pressure. Being able to choke a group of enemies renders them pretty much useless and allows an easy multi-kill, and it does also dominate in a 1v1 by completely turning the tide of the battle. As for its weaknesses, I honestly couldn't even think of any, so let me know down below if you think it does have some weaknesses, but now that you get that 80% damage reduction, there really aren't that many glaring downsides. So that's it for all of his base stats and abilities. Now we're going to move on to some of the more important stuff, starting with his best star cards for Galactic Assault. Obviously it does really come down to personal preference, so these definitely aren't the only cards that you can use, but these are just the cards that I think are the most important and most well suited cards for Galactic Assault. So the first card I'm going to recommend is his bonus health star card, and as the name suggests, this just gives Vader bonus health with up to an extra 150 HP when fully maxed. Vader is obviously a little bit slower and meant to be a bit more of a tank, so that extra HP is very useful for his playstyle. The next card I'd recommend using is his There Is No Escape card, and this one makes it so that you can actually throw his saber further by up to an extra 50%. Now that I'm looking at it, it actually doesn't sound all that much of an increase, but it really does make his saber throw a genuine mid-range sniper, allowing you to pick off a lot more easy kills with that out of range. Now for the third card, I'd mainly recommend using his Fueling the Rage star card, which just increases the time you can use focused rage by up to 25% each time you get a kill while it's active. I did already mention how useful focus rage can be, giving extra health, extra damage and extra stamina, so obviously the more time you can keep it active, the better off you'll be, which is exactly what this card does. Now there are two other cards that I'll mention in case these three don't actually suit your playstyle, as like I said earlier, star cards are a very subjective choice depending on the way you play. The next really useful card to use is his Furious Resilience card, which actually adds damage reduction to the Focus Rage ability at up to 25%. Honestly, I'd actually say this card is objectively better than the extended Saber Throw card, so you can easily switch these ones out. Like I said, it comes down to playstyle, and I personally prefer having that longer throw, but this one actually is a better card in my opinion, so it's definitely worth checking this one out. Now, the last card I'm going to mention is the Surrounded by Fear card, which is more for those of you who struggle to make the best use of his stamina, as like I said, it can be hard at times, especially for those who are less experienced. This one makes it so that each time you get a kill, you actually regain up to 20% of your stamina back. For a lot of the game, that's not really that necessary, but for those moments when you would normally run out of stamina, it can actually be really helpful to give you just that little bit of extra stamina to take care of those last few enemies. Now, like I said, these are the main cards that I'd personally recommend using. However, if you do disagree, then definitely feel free to let us all know down in the comments section, as there really is no right or wrong when it comes to something like choosing star cards. So now moving on to some of the best maps to choose Vader on when you're playing Galactic Assault, and the top three that I've picked are the Death Star, Tatooine and Naboo. The thing all these maps have in common is those tight close quarters areas, and with Vader being slightly slower and less agile but also more of a tank, that very much suits his playstyle compared to some of the more open maps out there, allowing him to get close to his enemies without having to be in their line of sight for too long. Now obviously that doesn't mean that these are the only three maps that you should choose him on. He's honestly great on just about every map in the game, but these are just the ones that are probably a good starting place if you're not too sure what to choose him on. Now, moving on to some tips for Galactic Assault, and like I said a few times already, Vader is obviously a very tanky character, and so you do need to play him with that in mind, as most of the other Saber heroes play fairly similar, whereas to me Vader does seem to be fairly unique because of that slow mobility. I've always been sort of a very run and gun type of player in Battlefront 2, which then obviously translates to a super aggressive playstyle with the Saber heroes as well, and for characters like Luke or Maul for example, that really does work in their favour due to their speed and agility. However, with Vader it does require a little bit of a change up in terms of his playstyle. It's not to say that you can't play him aggressively, but it's just a little bit of a different style when it comes to being aggressive. For example, with Darth Maul you can pretty safely push into a room with 4 or 5 enemies without having too much to worry about, as you can obviously use those spin attacks to get out of there if you do get into a bit of trouble, and so because of his agility he kind of has a backup plan built into his arsenal already. With Vader though, that's not so much the case, at least in terms of his mobility. Obviously, if it does go south, then you can often fall back on your force choke, or even just try and tank the damage a little bit and take as many enemies out as you can. But you don't have that ability to just quickly vanish like a lot of other characters do, since like I said, he's slow, he's got a big hitbox, and his stamina can drain fairly quickly. Relating it back to that aggressive playstyle, it's definitely still best to play aggressive and try and push objectives or spawn points, but you do always need to have a fallback plan in the back of your mind, because like I said, he just doesn't have that ability to quickly get out of trouble unless that force choke is active, in which case that's actually probably one of the best fallback plans in the game. Now, with all of that being said, when you do have that fallback plan ready, or if you have a few teammates around you for example, you can really become super aggressive in terms of just straight up locking down objectives on your own or helping your team push into an objective, because all that health is a huge advantage, and with that fallback plan being ready, if something does somehow go wrong, you aren't completely doomed. Lastly, and I say this for most of the heroes, but it's always a good idea to try and combine your abilities and just generally make the most of them overall. A lot of people will use the focused rage ability almost to regenerate health once they've lost it, but you should always use it before getting into a fight rather than after. Using it after a fight means that it's not actually going to regen your health, it'll only be a temporary boost. Let's just say for example that you get into a bad situation, you lose 500 HP meaning you're down to 450, then obviously once it regens you will be back to 700 until you gain some more back from getting kills. If you use focus rage then obviously you will quickly go up to 900 HP, which seems pretty decent, but that will eventually go back down to 700 once the ability runs out. Now let's just say that you activate it before a fight. You'll start with 1150 HP, then once you lose that 500 HP in the fight, you're then down to 650 HP, which can then regen back to 900 rather than 700 like it was in the last example. So right there, that pretty much shows that if you activate it before a fight, even if you take the exact same amount of damage in that fight, you'll actually end up with 900 HP rather than 700. So hopefully I explained that well enough, because obviously with lots of numbers involved it can get pretty confusing. Other than that, like I said, just combine your abilities such as the Force Choke and the Saber Throw, and all around just stick to that more slow and calculated playstyle while still being fairly aggressive. Vader can take a little bit to get used to in Galactic Assault, but with some of these tips and a lot of practice, I'm sure you guys can improve your Vader gameplay overall. So that's going to be it for the Galactic Assault tips. Now we're going to move on to some tips for the Hero vs Villain game mode. So starting off with the best star cards, the first card is the same as the GA card, and that is his bonus health card, which doesn't really need too much of an explanation. More health is always helpful, especially against other heroes. The second card again is the Furious Resilience card that I mentioned for GA that adds damage reduction to focus rage. Again, this just adds to his tanky nature, and again, more health or less damage being taken is going to be a game changer against enemy heroes. As for the third card, for me it is the Punishing Grip card, which extends the duration of his Force Choke, which is absolutely deadly if you're playing with your teammates. The longer the enemies are choked, the longer your teammates can shoot at them, and therefore the more damage it's going to do, so this one is deadly in that situation. Now moving on to some tips for the hero game modes, and if I'm going to be honest, most of it can be transferred straight from the GA tips, so I won't cover too much, but I will just touch on what I already mentioned. Again, Vader is obviously a lot stronger in terms of his health than most of the other characters, so you want to do your best to use that to your advantage. If you can, try and deal 3 or 4 quick hits to an enemy and then block so that they can't deal any in return. You're going to pretty much bring them down to half the amount of health that you have, and then therefore you're right in the best position to take on the rest of the fight with ease. Again, that choke and saber throw combo is deadly, or you can even choke, swing your saber and then use the saber throw after that as well. Either way is definitely very deadly. Make the most of that focused rage ability as well. Again, it gives you more damage, more stamina and more health, plus with that card equipped it also gives you damage reduction. So it's pretty clear how dominant this can be, and it's best to try and use it pretty much as often as you can. Now, as for some characters to look out for, Chewie and Luke are probably the only two that I'd say you need to keep an eye on in HVV and Hero Showdown. Chewie isn't as good as he used to be for sure, but just that ability to break your block with his blaster can cause some trouble at all times, as well as obviously just having that stun. He's far from unbeatable, but obviously just make sure to try and keep an eye on him. As for Luke, you should win most fights against Luke, but the reason I included him was because his stamina and swing speed can be very dangerous if you're low on stamina. If he can completely drain your stamina, then he's going to be able to kill you so quickly with that super fast swing speed. So like I said, he's generally fine to handle, but just keep that in the back of your mind. So that is going to be it for our Vader Hero Guide, guys. Hopefully some of these tips will help you guys out, and if they did, then make sure to smash that like button to help support the channel. Feel free to comment down below which character you'd like to see next, and I will do my best to get one out as fast as possible. If you are new to the channel, then feel free to subscribe and turn on your notifications so you don't miss out on any more Battlefront 2 videos or live streams. Thank you all so much for watching. You guys have a great day, and I'll catch you all in the next one.